Hello, friends. So now we're going to go on to the history of the Joan of Arc strategy, how it came about, how it evolved from the versions into what we see now. Now, because the Joan of Arc strategy has become intertwined to some extent with my own reputation as an individual, as a board game player, and as a developer, then I feel the necessity to talk about myself a little bit and about my own history as well. Now, I know that's not going to interest everybody, and that's perfectly fine. Just skip ahead to something more that interests you or switch to another video if you like. It's completely up to you. But permit me to go back into my own history to some extent to talk about myself as an individual and a designer and a board game player as it connects to Joan of Arc. So my family emigrated to Canada in about 1981, 1982 from a refugee camp in Austria. My parents escaped from Czechoslovakia, which was a communist nation, into the neighboring Austria. Now my dad worked as a lumberjack between the borders there, and he worked every day with a horse and a wagon load of hay, and in the evening he'd come back with lumber. So one day he smuggled my mom, my two oldest brothers, another family, and their eldest daughter all underneath a wagon load of hay across the border into the no man's land. They hustled out to Austrian policemen who eventually processed them into the system and put them in a refugee camp. They came to Canada, and my dad and my parents effectively just worked their way across Canada till money ran out in Western Canada, where we settled down in Alberta. We settled down in a small farmstead. We didn't even own the property. My dad had to work for about 25 years before they struck a deal with the owner, who gave them this rundown, broken down property homestead, and they settled down and made it into something where they still live to this day. Very rough life for my parents. It was good. We had a great childhood. I had 8 siblings, and so it was a very fun-filled, creative homeschool environment. Now, I know homeschoolers sometimes get flack for being socially awkward or incapable in some manner or another, but there's a lot of, I think, the bad examples stand out, but there's generally they can be kind of average people just like anybody else, surprisingly, right? Anyways, so it was an interesting childhood for me. I had 8 siblings. We didn't have any video games or movies or TV or anything like that, so we just created our own games. We didn't even have board games or anything like that. It was a tough life, difficult times in childhood. We weren't wealthy by any stretch of the imagination, and we just made our own fun, and we created a lot of our own board games. We had maybe Candyland and Snakes and Ladders, and eventually we got Risk, which was for me a massive game changer, because all those little miniature pieces, me and my brothers started to invent our own games, and that was where I first kind of bit down into this idea of designing my own games. And prior to that, we were designing everything on a checkered carpet. We'd invent our own games, and it was just a fantastic fun time. We're also very musically inclined, which is pertinent to what I'm going to talk about here, because being musically inclined and doing all kinds of different performances throughout our lives. Eventually my brother went on to becoming a doctorate of music in McGill University in Montreal. Another one was, I think 3rd or 4th place in a national competitions for young composers of Canada, a couple of years ago, and I think he was 25 or something. And different siblings are parts of different symphony orchestras across Canada too. So, very musically inclined people. One of the things that we found advantageous to ourselves growing up as we were going to different performances and such was to be critically thinking about, critically expressive about the positives and negatives of people's performances. I'm saying that complexly, but it'd be something like this. Instead of people saying, "Great job, brother. Great job, son. 10 out of 10. Keep doing what you're doing. You're an amazing child." Yes, there was some of that, of course, too, but they'd also say, "Great job. Great job. You did fantastic work. But right here, you need to work on this bit, and this part's good, and this part's a little rusty. You need to tweak that up as well." Amongst our siblings, that was what we did. The parents, not so much with us, but amongst ourselves. And that was very valuable. And I think also, too, when you watch stuff like Britain's Got Talent, Americans Got Talent, you see some people, poor people, they end up on stage and they can barely hold 2 notes together. Yeah, and it's like, how do they get that far? Well, it's kind of delusional kind of perception of their capability. So we had this kind of critical thinking aspect where we would be open with each other and tell things that we thought needed to be improved upon, which comes in handy later on in life. And I think generally we're all kind of capable individuals of deeper thought and complexity behind things, not just because of that, obviously, but because of other things as well. Anyways, so that was my childhood. I really enjoyed it. And then when I got, I think age 16, I started traveling the world a little bit. I lived in London, Australia, South Africa, and I, got to see my own share of the world. Anyways, so things went up and down as a person's life does. And I know 2016 was a particularly bad year for me. It was, it was pretty horrible. The worst year of my life, essentially. But then 2017 turned around. A beautiful girl that I fell in love with. We got married in 2017, and then to top it all off, well, we bought a house then as well. To top it all off, on October 3rd or something like that, Doug Friend from Historical Board Gaming contacted me and said, would you like to be a developer for HBG? We see some of your works online. Will Henson really, admires some of the stuff you did. Do you want to come on board and be part of the team? And I was just chuffed to bits, as they say. I was super excited about it because, hey, Historical Board Gaming was the best board game company in the world, as far as I knew. Some of my first money I poured into board games, once I was aware of Axis and Allies, I bought that, and then shortly after, was like, this is a much better game, Global War 1939 by Historical Board Gaming, and immediately jumped on that bandwagon and never looked back at Axis and Allies again, because I just thought it was amazing game. And I know it had its flaws, and it does have its flaws, and things will continue to have its flaws, but what I wanted out of a game, Historical Board Gaming provided. The miniatures were just spot on, love them. I love the rule set that they came up with. Things were great. Of course, it had flaws, just like any other thing. It was still amazing to me. I really loved it. And to be part of that team, of the developer team, I was so excited about that, to be part of that. And immediately I sent out a slew of emails saying, oh man, I'm so excited to be part of the team. Here's some thoughts I had on this, and here's some thoughts on this. And Doug Friend would be like, great, good stuff. Here's some things you could work on. I want you to do a Canada expansion. And I was super pumped about that. And it was great. I had an amazing time of it. Now, I have email proof of all this stuff I'm going to say. So if people say, no, we came up with this beforehand, then, fair enough, right? There's something to be said. I have email proof of a lot of different stuff that I'm going to talk about here. So there's that I want to mention right out the gate. And there's also stuff that I got to say that right out, good ideas rise to the top. If you have a game like Axis and Allies and say, hey, I want to modify it and make it better, then people are going to roughly come up with the same good ideas. Generally speaking, come up with the same ideas. They're going to say, we're all working for the same look of World War II history. So we see that historically this happened. How could we incorporate that in that game? And so they're going to try to come up with the same ideas, generally speaking, to solve the same problems. And so a lot of the ideas that I propose might have been proposed by other people as well. I will grant you that 100%, right? That's I have no issue whatsoever. Good ideas rise to the top, and I've been saying that, and I believe that. And there's been countless amount of times where I talk to some other entrepreneurial kind of spirit out there and say, hey, what do you think of this idea? They're like, I just thought, I thought about that last year, and it's cool to see how other people are thinking about it. Are you stealing my ideas? They'll ask even, right? Because, generally it's like surprising the coincidences of commonalities of ideas between people. Say like, well, there's a host of different things that make sense, but some of it just makes sense, right? The idea that you could have, this is not my idea by any stretch, but artillery supporting infantry, like that's happened in history. It wouldn't surprise me if there's lots of games that have artillery supporting infantry, and there are, because that's not a unique idea. So it's one of those interesting things. Good ideas rise to the top, as I say. Anyways, going on from that, so I sent out massive amounts of emails, and at the time, as Will Henson was the lead designer, and so we would email back and forth, and it got to the point where they said, look, we need to set up a Dropbox because the way you're shooting the ideas at us is a little bit overwhelming, that they have a lot to manage. But anyway, so I was in contact then with Morton Monk, as well as other individuals, and I do have email proof where I'm suggesting like the C-centric C-zones. Where everybody's saying, great idea, it's brilliant. We're not going to incorporate it in version 3, but in version 4, we're going to incorporate it. I have other stuff where I talk about aircraft scrambling on land. I talked about that in version 2. This is when version 2 is in development. They said, great idea. We're going to look into doing that as well. And a whole host of other things that we suggested. How to tackle anti-blocking units in the Pacific that we have a problem with in Axis and Allies Global. We had a problem in 1939, Axis and Global War, sorry, Historical Board Gaming's 1939, and also we had it in version 2, so we talked about how to fix that as well. We had extensive, email documentation of all this stuff as well, and all kinds of different stuff. And I could prove it to whoever wants to see different parts of it. But people can back me up. Some of the developers, if they wanted to, they could look in some of their email history and see that I had a lot of feedback on stuff and a lot of positive comments on saying how I helped to develop things. Right. So to move on a little bit in history, I started to stack up different documents I wanted to bring down into a designers meeting that they had in January 26th, I think it was, of 2018. Yeah, I got married in 2017. In 2018, we're going to have a designers meeting. Started to gather stuff together, put together some paperwork. It was going to be, I was super excited for it. Doug Friend, he was, very gracious, invited us all down there. I believe he even, maybe not in this case, but Later on, he paid for one of my tickets going down there. The first one I think I paid for myself, although he may have paid for half of my ticket going down there for the first one that I never end up going to, because like a week before I was due to fly out, I actually got injured in a fairly bad vehicle accident. I was driving on my way to with a fairly not new pickup, but used but new to me pickup truck, still getting used to it. Hit ice and rolled over upside down, right? Rolled over a couple of times, smashed my head in pretty good, and broke my hands pretty good. And then in my concussed state, I thought, I got to climb out of the window and see if everybody's okay, see if my wife's okay. She got out of the vehicle before me without a scratch barely, and came out. And still, I thought, got to get out of this thing because the ambulance is going to cost us a lot of money. That was running through my head. It was like, no, we got to hitchhike to town because this ambulance is going to cost us money. So here I'm trying to scramble out of a vehicle in icy weather out there with all kinds of traffic going by, and 6 a.m. in the morning or something like that, 7 a.m. in the morning, worried about the price of ambulances. And so I climbed out and completely destroyed my hands climbing out. In my concussed state, didn't even feel it, but cut my hands to the window all the way down to the bone. Effectively, I cut my nerves and my tendons in this hand all the way down to the bone. And yeah, it was fairly serious. I still don't have any feeling in these hands, but they had to rush me to the hospital and did a bunch of work there. Took me out to the city 6 hours away and did an operation there as well. I was in the hospital for a few days and surprisingly bounced back pretty quick. In the end, they ended up putting in a couple pins into my hand. I'll just hold them like this. It still surprises me how long these puppies are. They're not small. A couple pins in that hand. I know there's a lot of people that have accidents and get pins and such, but this is always surprising me anyways. So this hand was all busted knuckles and such, and this one I couldn't even move it. They didn't even want me to move it, so they immobilized it for several months. In the end, I had to have 2 operations on this hand. I had 3 in total. The first one locally, second one 6 hours away, and another one several months later, because the scar tissue was preventing me from moving my hand. And when I was starting to get mobilized, I could barely even move my fingers. Now I have fairly good range. It's still kind of weird, but I don't have feeling in these ones very much. I've gotten some feeling back. So initially you could poke a pin in it, I can feel it. Now I've got some nice sensory stuff, but it was cut, quite sizably cut, it was interesting. Anyways, so that happened. And of course, at that point, I couldn't go to the HBG meeting, although we did try. We did leave the hospital. And once they released us, I moped around the house for a day, just saying, I'm so bummed that I can't even wipe my own butt at this point, right? That happened once. My wife, I was glad I was married at the time. She wasn't so happy, but anyway, so we did rush over the airport, but we didn't make it to get our flight. She was going to come with me and assist me out there in Tulsa, but yeah, it was probably in the end we decided time was too short. We might not make the airplane anyways, and we thought, I'm going to be a bit of a burden to those guys anyways. So that was, unfortunate, but that's just the way it goes sometimes, right? So yeah, yeah. So Will Henson actually sent me a really lovely email, of an encouragement, which really, brought a tear to my eye. I think I was at the hospital at the time too, and it really, I remember being very moved and touched by that, and I really thank him to this day for his considerate spirit in that regards. Anyway, so moving on. So of course I couldn't type or do much at all. I had the Canada expansion mostly, well, I had it all mostly in my head, and a lot of notes on paper. I had to transcribe it into more of a written form. We were intending on trying it out there. We didn't end up doing it, of course, at the Tulsa first gathering in January 2018. Yeah, anyway, so I slowly pulled myself together and started working on stuff. Of course, I couldn't type at the time, but several months later, after the second operation, which I believe was somewhere in July, according to my notes here, in July 2018, so a good long time afterwards, I finally got that second operation where they cut open my hand again, took out a bunch of scar tissue, and then I started to be able to work a little bit more. So initially it was just the left hand, and then of course full force then. So at that point I started working the Canada expansion a bit more, although it was kind of new to me, this concept. Now, I wasn't brand new at designing games. Well, that's not quite fair to say. I had childhood experience, as a teenager, but also in regards to Global War 36, I made out this massive amounts of expansion I called the JX Overhaul, and I put it on Axis and Allies forums. So, well, I have email proof that Martin Monk read it and he liked it, he says, right? Back in the day, this kind of stuff. So it was positively received by some individuals where I talked about import mechanics. I talked about submarine pens and how they'd work, although that was using pieces provided by HPG. I just didn't like the rule set. Weather mechanics and a few other things, Tundra, how it would work out, and a few other things like that. Naval strategic naval moving. I had a version of that there as well, although it was different than what HBG came up with. Different stuff like that. Anyways, but to design an expansion and also being kind of not used to working for other people on a creative level with other people, working to create something, I don't know. I don't have much experience just designing an expansion according to other people's standards, let's say. If it was something that I just designed my own self, but what do they want in it? What complexity do they want into it? This kind of stuff was a little bit harder for me to really do it. Anyways, all that to say, it of course does have its flaws, did have its flaws at the time, and still does, of course. Let's see. So that all happened, worked on stuff some more, and then Doug Friend graciously invited me to join them in Tulsa for, I believe it was somewhere in August, according to my notes. It might not be the case, but in August, I was supposed to fly down there and have a bit of a meeting with him, which really excited for. Like I said, he paid for half my ticket. He hosted me at his place, which was really kind of him. And we had I think 3 days. We had a productive meeting. We sat down at the table and discussed a lot of stuff. We discussed different issues that we came up with. I talked about the Joan of Arc thing. We talked about other things as well. And we talked about, he gave me different projects he would like me to take a look at and work on. And I gave him some feedback on things I've been doing, asked him some advice on the Canada expansion, proposed some other expansions as well, and different things like that. We had a fairly productive meeting. It wasn't too long afterwards where I got back October went by. October, he sent me an email saying, thanks for the good meeting. It wasn't too long afterwards, I think end of October, where my wife told me that we were pregnant, or rather she was pregnant with my baby, or our baby, and that we're due somewhere in July. Now, at that point, it was a bit, I didn't know what to expect as a young dad. My dad had 9 kids. He had 9 kids. He worked really hard much of his life. He was a very busy man. It was hard. It was hard for him. He had a very different childhood than me, especially in communist Czechoslovakia at the time. He didn't have the same luxuries that I had, that same leisure time, the same resources to play games and to devote time to other things. For him, he was quite busy. Sometimes it was a matter of not necessarily survival. No, it wasn't that, but it was a different world that he lived in. Even to this day, when they come to Canada, they had trouble making friends with people their age because they said we're 2 generations behind, or we're at least 1 generation behind. Yeah, 1 generation behind. All their friends are people that were, old enough to be their to their parents, almost, not quite, but almost at least a decade older than them, because they just could relate more with people than people their age. Anyway, so me as a expectant father, I said, what am I going to do now? I'm a board game designer. I'm loving what I'm doing, but I'm not working a great job. I'm working, I don't think I was working anything fancy, just next to minimum wage or somewhere just above it anyways, not doing that good financially. And what do I do, right? I need to start providing more for my family. I need to get a job that pays better healthcare. I need to do all these things. I need to, let's say, I need to go into a burst of energy, make a bit more money so that I can actually support my family and provide for them a little bit more. And having this example of my dad, where essentially it was like, you don't have time for anything else. You got to support your family and devote yourself 100%. As a young dad, I thought, you know what? Maybe I can approach board games again in the future, but right now, I think I should put everything on the back burner, put board game design on the back burner. Who knows, I might not even have time to play board games, and put that on the back burner as well, and really just buckle down and kind of grow up in some aspect of things. Now, as a father of 2 kids now, yes, it's not too hard, right? We live in the modern day where we have a lot of resources and free time and to indulge a little bit in board games if we wanted to. But at the time, I thought, you know what? I want to be a good dad. I want to be there for my kid as much as possible. And in my head, I thought too, I could just stick around with being a developer for HPG, but I might just be dead weight, where I will be attached to all these email strings and yet not produce anything of value. And so in my head, I thought, should I vacate that seat so that somebody else could sit in it and actually do good work? Or should I just kind of just be there? Effectively, not necessarily costing anybody money, of course, no, because I'm not going to be doing anything, but at the same token, I'm going to be occupying some virtual space in some sense, right? Where I'm going to be just not doing much of anything, not much even able to play test anything for that matter. So at the time, I thought the best course of action is to, get better work, get a good job, and cut off some of the excessive luxuries that I had in my life. Focus on being a father. And so I sent my email or had a phone call with Doug Friend and retired myself from that. To my regret now, I really do regret that. I think it would have been, I think I would have managed. I'm managing now, fine, just designing my own board game plus doing this thing. Yeah, I enjoy it. I do have time. And I would have had time, and I should have stuck with it. Yes, I probably would have had to tell the guys, look, I need to wait a little bit to sort things out and see what I'm capable of doing. But I think what I did then was an overreaction of just quitting being developer, hanging out my developer hat with regret and doing other things. Yeah, I think I'm prone to do that. Overreaction. So yeah, I really regret doing that. And I hope, I do hope that I didn't feel like I uh, cut anybody off in any brisk way where I said, you know what, I can't do this, sorry, and disappoint people to that extent. I really hope that was not the case, that they harbor bitterness. One would hope anyways. So that's the story about my career as a developer. Now I have huge email chains of different communications I had of, people thanking me for the work and my feedback on things and my assistance in developing things. Now, of course, they carried on without me and bore that child of version 3 and gave birth to it, built it, made it, and created something else with it. So I can't even take credit for that because effectively I didn't ride that train to the end of version 3. So though I may have suggested stuff, at the end of the day, it was just suggestions, just like anybody else puts suggestions out there. Can I take credit for certain things? No, I'm not going to, I might say, oh, I feel like, I had some impact on that, but a lot of people have impact on the development of version 3 and version 4, a lot of feedback. And that's the best thing about historical board gaming. I think that's what makes it, well, I think that's what can make it the best board game out there effectively, is because the feedback from the community of saying, hey, this might need to be worked on. This is good. This is not so good. I think that is great. That's why I brought up this idea of being a musician before, and how I really appreciate that honest feedback from my siblings. Is I felt like one of my assets in historical board gaming is to give kind of constructive feedback that wasn't just a yes man system. We're saying, look, that looks great, that looks good, that looks good job, everybody. But I actually said, you know what, I like this, but I don't like the way that looks. Is there any way we could change the map in that regards? Or do we have any other options? I remember one example is I didn't really like how jungles looked in version 3. My feedback there was like, look, I think they look like little fluffy sheep, fluffy green sheep. And I still think they don't look ideal, but you know what? That's all right. That's all right. It's minimal stuff. It's minimal stuff. But hey, I just thought we can improve this, right? We could take it up a little extra notch, can't we? And that's why I felt that I was a bit of an asset there. Plus my experience in creative thinking, coming up with ideas, coming up with a slew of different ideas to everybody. So I thought that was quite nice. Now on to the history of the Joan of Arc strategy. Now at the time, because I couldn't join them in Tulsa, I ended up releasing some of the stuff I wanted to talk about with the Tulsa guys, in the January 2018 meeting. I released it online on the Access Analyze forum. I talked about the Joan of Arc exploit, posted on 2018 of May. And then later on in May as well, the Rabid Bear exploit as well, where I talked about these things because I thought, hey, it should be addressed. I thought that by releasing it to the community, people would have some feedback on how it could be changed. That was my motivations behind that. Just like we see now with version 4 on Discord, where people have a back and forth in regards to that, and it improves the game, which I think is fantastic. It's great stuff. So not only did I put it on Access Analyze forums, I sent it to Will Henson, and he sent it to the rest of the designers and said, there's this Joan of Arc exploit, Joan of Arc exploit that needs to be addressed. What are your thoughts on it? And in the email string, we talked about the different fixes behind it. And one of the fixes was that was listed here was option C, or option 3, about decreasing American income, which is the final kind of solution that we had. But you see that the developers behind it were these ones listed in the email. They weren't anybody else. I mean, other people may have been brought on board, but I was on the forefront of helping to fix the Joan of Arc exploit. That's all I want to say. In version 2, it was an exploit because you could go, and as France declare war on any neutral nation with no downsides to it, where America wouldn't get penalized to their income. And so you could have the French declare war on, say, Portugal, and then the British say, perfect, we just grab Portugal, we can grab, 1, 2, 3 IPPs worth of territory from Portugal. Boom, done with minimal effort, right? That's one of the things you could do. Just snipe any one unit if you wanted to, or do it on multiple times, saying, all right, I gotta just hit it, whatever you wanted to, right? The Rabid Bear exploit was something similar, where the Russians could be, once at wartime income, say, I declare war on Portugal. Okay, Britain, now you go grab it. and send me some more lend-lease. Now I declare war on Iran. Okay, Britain, send me some lend-lease again once you capture that, or whatever, right? You could do different things to really tip the scales. Brazil, sure, declare war on Brazil, bring America to wartime income, or something like that, right? That was version 2 exploit. So we talked about it, we fixed a few things, we discussed it, and we put it all on the table. So that was the history of version 2 Joan of Arc exploit. Now in version 3, we thought as the developers, now for me, again, at this point I stepped down, but my feedback on this one was that option number 3 was the best one. Now version 3, again, I can't take credit for anything after my leaving. Version 3 was fixed by the developers, which they did a great job. I think they did a great job. Again, I wasn't part of that at the end of it, so I can't say much. I thought it was sufficient. I thought it worked good. So for me, I reclassified it from an exploit to a strategy that you could try out. Now, it might be beneficial, it might not. I hadn't know if it had been tested. One presumes, which is not the greatest thing to do, but one presumes that the developers who were involved in playtesting said, yeah, this seems to be a good thing. It seems that nobody in our games has tried to do any of these things, so therefore we seem to have fixed it, which is great, good stuff. So for me, when version 3 rolled around, I thought, is that still an option? American income goes down by 8. Does it still work? Let's math this out. And I thought about it long and hard. I thought, you know what? The fact that it is something that you could do, and people are debating about it, or at least I was debating about whether the pros and cons behind it. Some people saying, no, you shouldn't do it as the allies. And some people saying, yes, it's a good thing to do as the allies. Then at the end of the day, that means it's no longer an exploit because it's not clearly to the advantage of the person playing that exploit. Before it was an exploit because there's no downsides. Now there's a downside, and there's sufficient debate about it that says, maybe it is balanced now. Maybe it is now reclassified from a strategy to an exploit to a strategy, and maybe it is a viable thing to try out. And I thought I'd try it out. So I've tried it out now in total to 3 games. First game, the Allies won. Second game, the Communists, well, it was like the Axis won, and then they recounted the victory points, and it was the Communists that won. In the last game, the Axis won. So which one is it? It's still not play tested. It's not play tested sufficiently to know the Joan of Arc strategy. Is it a good thing that's game winning? No, because then it would be an exploit, right? In some sense, if it was a clear cut, do this every single game, that's bad. That's not what we want. But the fact that it's not clearly defined as something you should do every single game, for me, that says it's now a strategy that you might want to do, you might not. The fact that I don't have conclusive proof that it is advantageous to any one of these 3 nations tells me that it is still, well, it's a viable thing you could do that may or may not work. Now, in my opinion, and this is my opinion, that it is not clearly to the disadvantage of the Allies. It might be, but it is determined on what the Russians do. If the Russians decide, perfect, we don't need the Allies anymore, now we can do all kinds of things to really throw the Allies underneath, underneath the waves and see if we could win, that's one thing. But if the communists say, you know what, we still need the Allies because the Axis are a common enemy, I'll just take my victory points from the Axis as opposed to the Allies. So it really depends on what the Russians do. If the Russians strike a deal with the Axis, which if the Russians strike a deal with an Axis in a regular game with no Joan of Arc exploit, is to the disadvantage of the Allies. So yeah, but if the Russians strike a deal with the Allies, just like they do historically, then it should clearly benefit the Allied and the Comintern cause, let's say, right? So any way I look at this, it says it doesn't really benefit the Axis. It doesn't benefit them all. They come in lowest on the rung. So the Joan of Arc strategy, in my opinion, puts the Axis on the lowest rung. The Russians are in the highest rung, just by depending on how much income they increase, whether 2 or 24 or 13. And the middle rung is the Allies, and it does depend on what the situation is. Have there been extra deals struck? Have the Axis and the Russians struck a longer Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, which I don't think works. I don't think that's a long-term solution. One of them has to break the treaty at some point. Have the communists struck a deal with the Allies? Well, in that case, it seems to be to the advantage of the Allies to some extent, right? Because now the Axis are at war with the Russians, and now the Allies don't have to send these to Russia instead, right? Is it to the advantage of Japan? I don't think so. I think maybe a tad, not too much. Maybe a turn or 2 more where the Americans don't go to war, but it also means a turn or 2 more where the Japanese don't collect their wartime bonus, and other things as well, where they don't capture territory from other nations. It also means a turn or 2 more where the Anzac and the FEC have more money to spend, put an extra few more units on the board, right? So it's not clearly defined. Italy, does it matter to Italy? I mean, it's the same either way, but it's not clear that it's to the disadvantage of the Allies. It's to the advantage of the Comintern, as far as I can tell. To the Axis, it's not, but the Allies is ambiguous. So that is my stance on the Joan of Arc strategy. That is its history. That is my history. That is how it evolved, how we, as developers, we started on fixing the problem, though I left before it was fully fixed or before version 3 was launched. In version 4, it's supposedly going to be fixed further, which tells me that maybe it was an exploit still. I mean, if it's such a detrimental thing in version 3 to the Allies, then perhaps it's still an exploit, which means it would be a good thing. So why would they need to change it if it was a good thing, right? Why would they need to change it, sorry, if it was a bad thing? They would only change it if it was a good thing, or if they felt it wasn't historically simulative enough, which I have issues with because the Allies, the British and the Russians collectively invaded Iran, Persia. Yeah, not through the French declaring war on them. No, there's that. But hey, it's one thing that they can do. So yeah, it's an alt history reason for why they're changing in version 4. Not because it's an exploit, not because it's super bad for the French to do. It's ambiguous at best. That's my 2 cents on the history. And the next bit is in regards to the controversy. Now we get to the controversy aspect of things. And the controversy is unfortunate. And it's a really sucky thing to have to talk about. And you may ask, well, why are you doing it then? Well, it's because I want to set the record straight. And I think I need to set the record straight. I feel like I need to clear my name to some extent and really put a different face out there for the people that don't know me or misheard things about me or that kind of thing. The controversy of the Joan of Arc strategy. This is the most unfortunate and confusing thing about this, and I still do not understand why it is so. There's a lot of bad blood originating from General Hand towards me, and I'm not sure why. He's taken several attempts at lashing out against me and disparaging my reputation as a board game designer and as a board game player to really lash out against me in a particularly hurtful and demeaning way. Disparaging me as a designer, and completely negating all the work I ever did for HBG, and as a player to try to paint me as some sort of bad actor in it to completely destroy the game. I suspect that this stems from one of our earlier games that we played, the Tanks on the Tundra game. And in that game, I was set up to be played as the Axis, and my opponents were going to be Panzer King playing as America, and then General Hand Grenade playing as the Commonwealth, and then we'd have Rank Carcass as the Russians. Now, I had a pre-planned game plan of how I'd like the game to set up, and I had planned a strategy where, hey, I'm going to go all out and take out Russia first. I saw this opening in version 2. I thought maybe it's a good opportunity to take out Russia as quick as possible. And so when I showed up at the event, I had I had a very thorough plan written down to follow my production orders and everything like that, and I was managing the 3 Axis nations, and I wanted to be fairly quick about it. When I showed up, they had switched things around on me, and the new guy, Panzer King, was going to be playing as the Russians. At that point, I stopped and I talked to General Hand Grenade. I took him aside and said, look, I had a pre-planned thing I wanted to do, a certain strategy. Should I take it easy on the new guy or not? And he said, no, don't need to bother. Me and Rank Carcass are experienced players. We will be able to help the Panzer King out as much as possible, and it should be no issue whatsoever. I said, all right, well, that sounds good. And I went ahead with my plan of going after Russia first. Now, retrospectively, I don't blame General Hand Grenade for saying that because he had no idea what I had in mind, and perhaps that was not the best thing to do. Perhaps I should have gone a more classic approach. But here I was, showing up at an event against the great General Hand Grenade and Rank Carcass, the fellows I'd seen on YouTube for several times, and somewhat intimidated by the other grand characters. And so I was nervous to try to, go away from the written script of what I intended to do. And so I proceeded with my attack against Russia and wiped them out. Now, does this antagonism from General Hand Grenade stem from that, where he has this aggression and anger towards me because I went after Russia in that game, and the new guy in the form of Panzer King? If I was playing as the Russians, there's literally nothing I could have done in that case anyways. Now, me and Panzer King, now known as Sky Marshal, have since become pretty good friends. We communicate often enough, and at the very least, we're compatriots, in a common hobby and common cause, and we talk a little bit. And he's made it abundantly clear to me on multiple occasions that he was never personally hurt or bothered by the fact that I targeted Russia first as Germany. Yes, of course, he found it unfortunate that he couldn't participate in the game to the fullest extent he would have liked to, but he was not bothered by the fact of me taking him out. That that specific part of it did not bother him at all. In fact, he's told me that it actually made him impressed with the game, that you did have that level of versatility within the structure of the game to do such a thing as go after Russia as opposed to going after France first, that you can kind of go off the books into alternative history and do something different. And so that was made clear by him. Is that where the anger stems from? Now, I have this Tanks on the Tundra game. I have it all recorded. I set up cameras beforehand. I'm somewhat a cautious person in that regards, and I recorded the whole interactions from start to end. My interactions with General Hand Grenade saying, no, go ahead with your original plans. We'll take care of the Russian player and assist him in all his endeavors. Is that where this anger stems from? Or is it perhaps in the World War I game where we tested it out, when we went over to Panzer King's house and we tested out the World War I game. And in that game, I brought along a friend of mine who was not in a great shape of his life and basically had his days and night shifts all switched around. And so I ended up playing the entire Entente Cordiale, which I didn't want to do either, while my friend basically had to pass out of exhaustion, essentially. Is that where this antagonism stems from? Now, for my part, yes, most likely a person could have always done better. I could, of course, communicated more, done better, be more gracious about everything. Not that I think I was ingracious. I just was less experienced than other individuals. Perhaps there's things I could have done to maneuver myself around individuals, but nonetheless, that's just the way it was. I wonder if that's where the anger stems from, because it seems to me that General Hand Grenade holds less grace over me than he does of other people.
Hilltop Pillbox was the least experienced player in the game, and even though I told him, you can do this, you can do, like you've got it, it's your game to lose, just whatever, just do this and you'll win. And he wanted to take his own path, and that's good. Like I like watching people do things that I wouldn't do, because I learn things when I watch people do that. He could have won the game a lot easier than he did, but he wanted to make the game a lot more interesting by doing other things. If you're pulling crap like that, then you're not trying to win the game. You're just trying to show everybody at the table there how clever you are. And the answer is no, you're not. You're just an idiot. Thanks for destroying our weekend. Thanks a lot, buddy.
Where he looks at other people and says, hey, they're trying something new. I'm happy to let them make mistakes, and that way I'm not making mistakes, and I could watch them make their own mistakes. Instead, he has taken me to task many a time on this video, saying, look how idiotic the Joan of Arc strategy is. If you play the Joan of Arc strategy, it's guaranteed that the Axis will win. And then in a subsequent video, it's guaranteed that it was completely obvious at that point, if you do the Joan of Arc strategy, that the Soviets will now win.
I'm the Axis, and you do that move, then I'm just going to be rubbing my hands together like, thank you. You just volunteered to lose the game. And I think, well, wait a minute. The Germans declared war on the Russians, and the Russians won the game. Yeah, but the Russians won the game a lot earlier than that. They won the game when Germany declared war on France. Not exactly at that moment. Like the Germans went in and they declared war on France, and so they were doing their attack moves, and the French player, who were the Allied player, said, no, I'm going to declare war on Iraq over here. So that cost the French player 10 IPP. He thought, ha, Germany's not going to get my 10 IPP. I've just cheated the system. And he only thought he cheated the system. What he did do was hand the game to the Russians. And I told the Russian player that. I talked to him for over an hour on the phone, telling him, yeah, you know what, you should declare war on Germany right now.
My response to all that is that I think that's very unfair. And I think it's hypocritical for General Hand Grenade to say, look at the community, it's filled with trolls and negative characters, when he himself is contributing in a major way to this poisonous and toxic potential community that we have there. Not that I think we do have a potential toxic community, but he does not assist in taming things down and spreads mistruths and lies about me, which I find incredibly saddening. So much so that I wanted to step away from Global War 36 in its entirety, because why would I want to be attached to a game that I formerly loved and really I was enthralled to work for, and to have all that that I have, taken away from me because of one character with several thousand subscribers who just decides, for whatever personal whim and personal vendetta, to try to destroy my reputation. And it is very unfortunate. And I've played this Joan of Arc strategy 3 times. The first time it was successful, quite amazingly so. And it wasn't videotaped, of course, so people just have to trust my word on it. The second time around, I played against Hilltop Pillbox and Panzer King in the Operation Winter Solace. And in that game, it was a predecided treaty between the two of them that they would ally together against me. Which, fair enough, why not, right? Sure, why not? And the last time I tried it, we were against a very stiff Axis opponent, and it did not work out in that case. Unfortunately, we were steamrolled quite quickly. But is that definitive proof that the Joan of Arc strategy does not work? I've had one success where the Allies won, one success where the Communists barely squeaked by a victory, and one success where the Axis squeaked into a victory as well, just by being able to target a certain area and the momentum of their attack, which was brilliantly done, by the way. Is that sufficient proof to completely demean and destroy the Joan of Arc strategy? That is incredibly sad to me. It is incredibly sad that a person doesn't look at it more than just a superficial look behind what it has to offer. Yes, I would say the Joan of Arc strategy is risky business. It's one of those things that boost up the Comintern by quite a bit, and it's a risk a person might have to take, or might think it's worthwhile doing, perhaps. But it's not a foregone conclusion that the Axis and the Comintern will ally together against the Allies. Nor is it a foregone conclusion that that it's the Communists that will win or the Axis that will win. General Hand Grenade himself has said in several videos, one where he says, "I will be rubbing my hands in delight if the Allies do the Joan of Arc strategy," with the implication being that it's because he would win, or the Axis would win. And another video saying, once the Allies do the Joan of Arc strategy, it's a foregone conclusion that the Comintern will win, which is not true either. Because in the other game where I played, in the last game I played with the Joan of Arc strategy, the Comintern did not win. And they actually, well, they lost quite early on. Is that a fluke? Is the other one a fluke, or is the first one a fluke? Which one is it? And for him to say with such vehemence and anger against me personally, as this person that came up with the strategy, I think is incredibly unfair, especially when a person can take his own strategies to task with the Swiss cheese gambit. It's not, it's an interesting tactic. It's something I might try one of these days, but I'm not going to rip it apart and call the creator of it some sort of name. It's not fair. It's not, well, it's not sportsmanlike. It's not gentlemanly, as is the common parlance amongst the HBG community. It's not classy, people, and I don't like it much at all. And it really dismays me to see this kind of creeping into people, and creeping into people that I really respect. General Hand Grenade. He has lost my respect. I do not respect him at all. I don't even enjoy watching his videos because of this. Now, I like him as an individual, and as a person, face to face, I actually quite like him. He's an enjoyable person. He's got a good charisma around him. I enjoy him in that regard, so I find him quite pleasant to be around. But to take this tone, to try to have this, well, whatever it is, a superior antagonism, the superiority complex and antagonism towards me on his channel, I think is incredibly rude. It is incredibly rude. Now, by saying all this, I know it will probably wreck any chances of me ever attending any games with him, and probably that's fair enough. Maybe I shouldn't ever attend, the future summer offensive. Maybe I won't attend next year. I'm going to be away somewhat deliberately. I'm making this video now because I'm going to be away next year. Anyways, and likely there's a chance I might never come back to this thing. But if anything, it's because I've been driven away by what I consider a bad actor and a bad toxic apple of General Hand Grenade. People might say, well, you've made this personal and made a personal attack against him. Well, he cast the first stone. Unfortunately, he did. And that's just the way it is. Anyways, so in spirit of fairness, I want to put out his videos as well, where he's addressed the topic of the Joan of Arc strategy, and let you guys have a listen to it and draw your own conclusions, and also take note of how he's trying to wreck my own reputation as a designer, as a creator of, a designer and developer of version 2, where we got rid of the exploit, and somehow paint himself as the person that put it all together. And not to mention also as a player, to try to tarnish my own reputation and completely wreck me and paint me as some sort of character that will attempt to win at all costs, regardless of how sportsmanlike it is. And that's not fair either. Now, in regards to sportsmanship, it's one of those tricky things. Is it permissible for a French submarine to head to the Pacific Ocean in hopes that instead of becoming a German submarine in the Atlantic Ocean, it becomes a Japanese submarine in the Pacific Ocean? Is that permissible? Is it permissible for the American fleet to go off the Indian Ocean if that's what they choose to do? Is that sportsmanlike? Is that gentlemanly? How do you draw the boxes around what you want people to do and what you don't want people to do? And why, if in some form they cross the line of the box where you suddenly feel it's unacceptable, why do you have the right? Who made you the authority where you can take a person apart and call them all kinds of names and disparage their character? That is very unfair. It is very unfair, and it is not the community I want to see. So that all being said, likely I'm going to be banned from a bunch of different things. And hey, unfortunately, it means that perhaps my reputation with HBG will worsen. But it's already quite bad as it is, for whatever reason. I think there's been some toxic people talking negatively quite a bit about me behind my back, which is unfortunate. I think very highly of the whole HBG crowd. I really enjoyed their company. I really appreciated them for all they're worth. I think they do good work, and I've always stuck up for them in my videos. And yes, I've said these things need to be improved, but I've always done my best to look at things critically and give them credit where credit's due. That is all that needs to be said. There's another thing I might say at the end, but here we go.
And that brings up another thing. This is what France likes to do. The designers of the game thought that they had fixed this. They didn't want to tell people, no, you can't do that, you're not allowed to do that. But what they did was they made it so the Allies would lose the game if they did that. Like 9 times out of 10, the Allies are going to lose the game. When Germany starts their move to attack France, if France then declares war on a neutral, like let's say they declare war on Portugal, or they declare war on Persia or something like that, then they cost them 10 IPP to do that. And so in that way, they're going to try to keep 10 IPP out of the hands of the Germans, right? It was kind of an exploit that, it's kind of a dirty move. And the designers of the game fixed that. So they said, sure, you can go ahead and do that, but you're going to lose the game. And, I've argued with people online about that lately. They think, oh no, they're not going to lose the game. They only lose 8 IPP off the American income. And they're keeping $10 away from the Germans. Well, for one thing, whatever territory they declared war on, Germany's going to get the income from that territory, so it's not exactly 10. It could be less than 10. And Germany's going to get the income for a number of turns. So let's say they whittle that down to 5. But the other penalty for that, and this is the penalty they put in, was that the Americans are going to go -8 in their peacetime income. And that's debilitating. Like, that is at least 1 roll, maybe 2 rolls. Probably just 1 roll, but maybe 2, that the Americans are going to have to do extra in order to get to their wartime economy. Now, if you're the Allies, you need to get the Americans in the war as soon as possible. And I tell you, if you're playing against me, I'm the Axis, and you do that move, then I'm just going to be rubbing my hands together like, thank you. You just volunteered to lose the game. And if I'm playing the Americans, and say you're playing the British and the French and you do that, first of all, I'm going to ask you not to when you say that you want to do it. I'm going to say, please don't do that. Please don't waste my entire weekend. I showed up here, I took a day off work because it usually takes us 3 days to play the game. And, I wanted to play a game. But now I'm going to sit in the corner for the first 2 days and do absolutely nothing. Just sit on my finger and rotate just because you thought you were clever. You're not clever, you're just a fucking idiot. That's all you are. You just agreed to lose the game because, take a look at it. It's not just 8 IPP. It's 8 IPP for about 7 turns. So 7 turns times 8 IPP. And at 65 or 6.5 IPP a turn, like I'm showing you here. I've got it right on the screen for you to see. Like, you can see you're going to lose 64 IPP forever. And if this is the way it goes, then you're not going to join the war until July of 1943. America has only got 5 turns to fight World War II. In order for them to have any effect whatsoever on this game, they have to be able to put troops on the ground in Europe or on the other side of the board in Japan or Australia or the Dutch islands. They're not going to have time. Believe me, the Americans are not going to have time to have any effect on this game whatsoever. The Germans are going to work the Commonwealth, they're going to beat the Commonwealth because Germany's stronger than Britain. France is going to be no factor after I dispatch of them here. I'm going to talk with the Russian players, say, hey, listen, we've already beaten one of the players in this game. We just need to work together a little bit. We're not on the same side, and we're eventually going to fight, but let's work together for a little while to make sure these guys stay down. I'm not going to do a damn thing to provoke the Americans. I'm going to make sure that the Japanese, all they've done is maybe place 3 capital ships. They've maybe declared war on China or on the Dutch islands, and that's it. That's all I'm going to do, one or the other. And America is going to stay out of the war for the longest time. And that's debilitating. Like, that is at least one role, maybe 2 roles. Probably just one role, but maybe 2, that the Americans are going to have to do extra in order to get to their wartime economy. Now, not only are they going to lose that amount of money, but it's going to take them longer to get to their income determined actions, like at 35 IPP where they can actually leave America. Before that, they have to stay inside of America and do nothing, basically. They can't even move their ships up and down the coast. So they're going to be a non-factor until very late in this game when there's absolutely nothing left for them to do. If I'm playing the Americans and you're playing the French and whoever else, I will never ever play on your team again. I might not even play at the same table as you again because you thought you were clever when all you were was a dick. You didn't give a shit about the people on your team. You just thought, hey, everybody's going to think I'm smart. They don't. They just think you're an asshole because you're trying to break the game. If I was you and you're out there, I would change the rule on that. Just make a house rule saying France isn't allowed to do that. Rather than let somebody ruin everybody else's weekend, like waste their time, because this game is only balanced if all 3 teams are trying to win. If one team is not trying to win this game, then the balance is thrown off in this game. The balance between all of these nations, all of these factions are thrown off if one guy is not trying to win the game. If you're pulling crap like that, then you're not trying to win the game. You're just trying to show everybody at the table there how clever you are. And the answer is no, you're not. You're just an idiot. Thanks for destroying our weekend. There was a recent game on YouTube, the Winter Solstice. That was a game where the Germans and the Russians ganged up on the Allies, basically. There's a lot to be said about that game, especially the declarations of war in that game. The declarations of war completely determined who won that game. I'm the Axis and you do that move, then I'm just going to be rubbing my hands together like, thank you. You just volunteered to lose the game. And I think, well, wait a minute. The Germans declared war on the Russians and the Russians won the game. Yeah, but the Russians won the game a lot earlier than that. They won the game when Germany declared war on France. Not exactly at that moment. Like the Germans went in and they declared war on France. And so they were doing their attack moves, and the French player, who were the Allied player, said, no, I'm going to declare war on Iraq over here. So that cost the French player 10 IPP. He thought, ha, Germany's not going to get my 10 IPP. I've just cheated the system. And he only thought he cheated the system. What he did do was hand the game to the Russians. And I told the Russian player that. I talked to him for over an hour on the phone, telling him, yeah, you know what, you should declare war on Germany right now. Because his roles, you got a D12 roll for each one of these. He'd already had one sleeping bear roll. He was already in the 30s. I said, you could declare war right now. He says, well, I don't want to do that. Me and the German player are going to call a truce for a little while. It wasn't going to last as long as it did. It ended up doing, but they did it. And I said, well, that doesn't matter. You can still talk to him, say, let's not attack each other. But I need to declare war right now, just so I can take these territories back, right, or take these territories down here. But he didn't. Anyway, big consequences, because This was an exploit, and it was the player who did this in the YouTube game that came up with that exploit and posted it online a couple of years ago, and he's done a couple of other things like that. And so, in response to that, we had to redo the Monroe Doctrine. We had to make up a rule because of France doing that. It's a shame that we have to do that, but we did. So anyway, we made up that rule, and basically what it was the Allies are going to lose. They're going to come in last place if they do that, because it's not a very gentlemanly thing to do. It's not very sportsmanlike. It's basically trying to cheat the rule book is what you're doing. It's not within the spirit of the game. And some people could argue that. They say, oh no, it wasn't, it was all in the rules, blah, 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 whatever. You know, if that's your opinion, that's your opinion. Okay, whatever. But we created a rule that said, we didn't create a rule saying it, but we created a rule that will make you come in third place if that happened to you. And we talked about that behind the scenes. Me and some other guys, you know, that that know the game really well. And you know, as soon as that video came out where the Germans had done that, and the French had declared war on Iran here, we called it. We said, okay, well, Russia's going to win. The Axis are going to come in second place, and the Allies are going to come in third. That game was over months ago.
Hello, everybody. Panzer King back here in the Lion's Den, bringing you the end of the war for Operation Winter Solace. That is right. The Axis have achieved a victory. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to part 2 of this grand finale, the battle that never was. Well, it's true. This battle I'm going to reenact as if the Germans won it, but sadly, with new calculations and new investigation into the victory points, the Germans did not win Operation Winter Solace. Those darn commies won them. Gosh darn it, gee. The reason why is because Germany still ended up with 12 victory points throughout its empire in Italy and Japan over there in the Far East. The problem lied the miscalculation of the victory points, or rather territories, in Russia. And we originally had thought, and I think all of us thought, that every territory of the homeland an opponent takes counts against victory points. Well, Hilltop already had 18 victory points. So we immediately thought, if you count up the German Randalls there, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 in Leningrad, and then 7 in Murmansk up here with the Americans. Well, it doesn't take a genius to do 18 minus 7 is in fact 11. Germany with 12 victory points, Soviets with 11, Germany won. Well, sadly not this case, because of the simple fact, if you look closely, northern Belarusia, and I'm upside down right now, so forgive me, and southern Ukraine are actually worth 0 point value. And because of that, only a territory with a point value of 1 or greater counts. So had I not made my minor mess up, because I did allow to go in and take Western Ukraine, but it was just a unit that I had misplaced, and I wasn't going to go back on what I did. I was going to be a man on my word. We would be tied right now. Now, I'm not upset by that at the least of it, because by the time Hilltop did his video, he had actually already packed up his board, and the last thing I'd want to do was have a tie game and feeling that we have to go on.
I stopped watching it because I already knew the outcome. That game was done, and that's because of a declaration of war. And you would think it's just a minor one, right? Like, it's only France. France has nothing to do with this game, basically, right? Like, hardly anything to do with this game. They're a minor power. Like, China has more to do with this game than Russia does, and China's a minor power, right? But they declared war on a neutral over here that happened to have 2 territories that were bordering Russia. The game was over, and like it should have been a much bigger score for the Russian player, but the Russian player in this game, Hilltop Pillbox, was the least experienced player in the game. And even though I told him, you can do this, you can do, like you've got it. It's your game to lose. Just, whatever, just do this and you'll win. And he wanted to take his own path, and that's good. Like I like watching people do things that I wouldn't do, because I learn things when I watch people do that. He could have won the game a lot easier than he did, but he wanted to make the game a lot more interesting by doing other things. And he made a couple of mistakes. They all did. They all made mistakes, as we all do. I make mistakes every time I play the game. But this mistake right here, this declaration of war like that, was a killer. Like, every single time, if you declare war on Iran, you are going to come in third place. We designed the game that way. Believe me, you can't win the game like that. And he knew that. He wanted to try to prove us wrong, and he, whatever. He didn't. Anyway, so that's what happened, and that was a declaration of war.
Hello everyone, so that concludes the controversial element of this video, and it was not very pleasant to make. I genuinely did not find joy in that. But I felt that I needed to make that video. I felt I was unjustly and unfairly attacked by General Hand Grenade. And for the record, I have attempted to reach out to him. When he was issuing these videos, I sent him a long 18-minute message on WhatsApp saying, hey man, what's the deal? Why are you attacking me on your channel? Can we talk about this in person first? Is there something about the Joan of Arc strategy that I can explain to you to kind of see my point of view? I think it's a good idea. But he never listened to it and never responded to it as well. So I'm not sure what the deal is. I've done my best efforts to be friendly to him, and every time I see him at summer offensives, to always be polite and respectful and greet him and treat him well as best as I can anyways, and act as if there's nothing going on. Because I shouldn't bring baggage like this to the summer offensive. I don't think that's right. But at the end of the day, still, I don't want to stand for this and let people just bully me through their channel and the weight that they carry behind him, and speak deliberate untruths about me. So for instance, when he says, we had to create rules to prevent the player of the strategy, which was me, the player of the strategy, from doing this kind of stuff, it's untrue, because I was part of the team that created fixes for the strategy. And it's just not true what he says there. Now, I didn't carry that to completion. Maybe, General Hand Grenade stepped in after I left and helped fix it, so he doesn't know. But I think he ought to know, at the very least, right? That my intentions behind this were always to fix it, to make it better. And in version 2, I believe we did that. In version 3, it was debatable if it's still good or not. And I think it's on the fence. It might be either or. But he should not have attacked me on a personal level, saying, we had to stop people like him. It's unfortunate that we had to do it, but we had to do it. And painting me as this bad character. That's not good. Now, because people have seen that General Hand Grenade has been attacking me on his channel in the past, although he hasn't since then, in any major way anyways, that I can see. People have seen that I have had issues with him in the past, and so they reach out to me. They approach me from the woodwork and say, hey, I know General Hand Grenade, and I played with him, and he was a dick. And that's not good either, to have people in our community being dicks to each other, and they got to be accountable for their actions and their deeds. So I'm not just making this video for myself. I'm making it for the community at large to say, hey, be good. Be classy, guys. Be classy. Promote a good gaming environment. And that's all, right? So I have 2 more things I want to talk about in regards to this Joan of Arc strategy, to kind of tidy it up. We talked about the controversy, and we'll talk about the elimination of the strategy. So in version 4, what they're introducing is, if I remember correctly, you have to combine any attacks against neutral nations with a combat move. So that means France, it can declare war against Iran. It just can't do it when it's the Germans' turn, which is a good fix. I like that fix. It's a good one, right? Because why would you just simply declare war on something without attacking them? Now, even Germany, if memory serves, yeah, I mean, Germany declared war against America when Japan declared war, but it followed it up with actions of submarine attacks, if memory serves. Operation Drumbeat, is that what it was called? Anyways, so yeah, I think that's a good fix to the problem. And that eliminates the Joan of Arc from ever being shown up on the table, which is fine by me. My take on this thing is, it's hard to know where to draw those boxes about what people consider permissible or not. Is it permissible for the Joan of Arc strategy to appear in version 3? Was it permissible for French subs to make their way to the Pacific to become Japanese as opposed to being German in the Atlantic? Is it permissible for the Germans to attack Switzerland in like a Swiss cheese gambit type of style? That's kind of alt history. Is it permissible for them not to attack Denmark and thereby get some sort of advantage out of that as well? there's a whole host of things that we can say, this is good, that's not good, this is good, that's not good. It's one of those things that needs to be open to debate and people to talk about, but not to disparage each other if they go outside the bounds of what people think should be in the rules. As long as it's not in the rules, I think for simplicity's sake, unless it's something that everybody can agree on is game breaking, like Joan of Arc was in version 2, and the Rabid Bear was in version 2, then I think we have to just come to a consensus on what we can agree on and what not. In a roundabout fashion, perhaps, but that's what we have to do. And we have to be always classy, gentlemen about it. Thank you all for watching. Cheers.